our Chief Scientist, Professor Dave Lamb.
Good afternoon, everyone. And wow, what an energetic crowd at this time of day. It's an hour on the knot till beer o'clock, and I certainly hope you're all going to stay back and enjoy a wonderful and relaxing, relatively unstructured dinner with us tonight. So anyway, we spent today talking about today and the near future. Here's a chance to have a dream. Let's think ahead to 2030. And we have a distinguished panel that I'd like to introduce who will be part of our conversation about what will 2030 look like in this wonderful agri-food sector. So first of all, I'd like to introduce, of course, reintroduce Belinda Clarke, our invited keynote today. Just a little bit of extra detail on Belinda. Belinda obviously is a founder of Agri-TechE, and we worked out that E used to be for East, but we thought if you just kept heading east, you'd end up being west anyway. But no, E, we'll leave it ambiguous. E for Europe, E for whatever. So welcome, and of course, we know Agri-TechE is about connecting farmers, growers, researchers, and technologists. Agri-Tech works really to enhance economic growth and agricultural productivity and environmental sustainability for the agri-food value chain. Sound familiar? Of course it does. That's why Belinda's here. So we're delighted to have you lasting with us this afternoon. Also, of course, we have Harvey, who's no stranger to, I don't think, anyone in this room, including Belinda. Ros has been with this CRC right from the beginning. As one of the people who helped develop the bid, co-founded the Knowledge Economy Institute with Mike Bryars, is an adjunct professor at QUT Institute for Future Environments in IntelliSensing. And in September 2018, of course, we're all proud to see that Ros was featured as one of the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence list. So aside from being a Food Agility Board Director, of course, Ros founds and Managing Director of The Yield. Committed her career and will continue to commit her career to creating public good through the innovative use of technology. So welcome, Ros, and thank you for joining us. Gavin Smith, always hard to pin down, but Gavin, of course, as President of Bosch Australia, thank you. We're truly honoured to have you here, Gavin, because your input in today's conversation was totally valuable, given the global agenda and strategy of Bosch to be a major player in this space. President today, joined 20 years ago and has held numerous roles in Australia and Germany. So Gavin is chair of the Internet of Things Alliance here of Australia, a director at The Yield and at Alkane Resources. Gavin is also industry advisor to CSIRO, Monash University and Queensland University of Technology for very good reason. So welcome, Gavin. And Mary Retallack, Dr. Mary Retallack is on our Food Agility Strategic Investment Council. Now, as an organisation, day-to-day working through the wonderful grind of building and, of course, working with you to deliver these wonderful projects, Mary is one of our council that makes a decision on what to back and for how long and for how much. So Mary is one of our instrumental advisors really in guiding us in the way with a good, solid industry background on how we develop and deliver projects. So Mary, it's a privilege to have you here. Mary has a very strong heritage and research background in the grape and wine industry, environmental stewardship, agroecology, viticulture, plant protection and native insectary plants. Mary is also currently Director of Wine Australia and Managing Director of Retallack Viticulture. Mary is widely recognised throughout the grape and wine industry, in particular for her enormous contributions, and was also an RIRDC Real Woman of the Year and an inductee in the 100 Women of Australian Agribusiness. So thank you, Mary, for joining us. It's a privilege to have you all here. So let's think ahead to 2030. Now we're going to just start thinking a little bit about it, and we'd like to play you a short video. So sit back. Right, who's for future number 2 in the 2 options? All right. Okay, very good. Okay. What I'd like to do is to offer up 4 questions for our panellists to get their view on. But also, we've surveyed many of you and wider to get a sense of what's floated to the top in people's responses to these 4 questions. And I want you, when I pose each question, just to think of what your answer is, jot it down, whatever, and see how it features in our conversation, but also in the survey results. So the first question, what technologies that are emerging now do you think will be mainstream by 2030? So what technologies that are only just emerging now, that's technologies I include processes as toolkits, as well as the enabling things that measure and go bleep. What do you think would be mainstream by 2030? Now, when we surveyed, have you got one in your head? You got an idea? Okay, so who used to watch Family Feud? Tony Barber. Okay, you've got it? Righto. Okay, survey said, so the size of the text and the colour is effectively a rank of the various elements that we've fought back. So that's what, if you like, the community around us think, is that technology. So, Gavin, if you don't mind, if I may pose a question to you, what technologies that you see emerging now do you think would be mainstream by 2030?
David asked me that question while I was sitting down the back before, and I think I gave him a bit of a fright, and I said, none. But that's actually a bit of a flippant answer. The answer is, I don't think anyone really knows what will be mainstream because the rate of change is so fast. Things that we don't even think about today could emerge within a year or 2 or 3 that then become mainstream, where today they're completely in our blind spot. What we can say with some certainty is we know what is currently developing, and artificial intelligence is front and centre. Low cost, wirelessly connected sensors that can go anywhere, anytime and be installed by anyone, and you will not have to think or question, are they actually able to connect, because connectivity will become ubiquitous. And I think the third thing which comes through on this as well is that, increasingly, for a company like Bosch, we're spending huge amounts of money in making it possible for you to sit in your car without driving it and getting from point A to point B. And one of the most complex environments that an automated machine can operate in is downtown Sydney. You've got all sorts of crazy things happening there, with people stepping off the footpath and trams now, I noticed. You name it, those cars are going to have to cope in all situations with all eventualities. So taking that automated tech and embedding it into tractors or headers or into picking robots is actually a lot easier than bringing it to automobiles. And we already know that these cars will be on the roads within the next 3 to 5 years. So if you ask me, I think the headline, artificial intelligence, will be in everything, whether it's part of how it operates or how it's made. Low-cost centres will enable us to do stuff with the data that artificial intelligence will need, and we'll have automated devices running around everywhere doing those things which typically have relied on someone having to steer it and control it.
Thank you. And Rosie, if I could redirect the same question to you, and of course we've seen some wonderful examples already today of projects, for example, where the yield are involved, that are cracking some significant challenges using some of the emerging technologies analytics now. So what's your sense on what will be mainstream by 2030?
Well, I agree with everything Gavin has said. I'd probably add satellites and micro-satellites and connectivity, that there'll be a big shift there. But I think the other thing that will happen, it probably arises a little bit from the video, is that we will see a lot more production move into semi-protected. It's the fastest growth area in agriculture, is semi-protected and controlled environment agriculture. And the reason is it uses less resources. It's much more efficient. And so, and it can be produced closer to where people are as a result of that. So I think with the pressures of climate change and water availability, we'll see more of this grow. But I think the other thing that's really interesting is, certainly I think AI is going to become absolutely standard, and probably the biggest change that this industry is going to have to make is that we're going to go from biophysically modelling the world to using AI to model the world. And really, if you look at the yield prediction project, which we did with berries, with the CRC, it is precisely that leap that actually happened. Because people would say it's impossible to predict yield on berries because every single growth stage is on the plant at the same time. So can you imagine trying to create a biophysical model, simulating that is impossible. But you can do it, using AI by taking the input and the output data and actually generate that. So I think that that's going to be huge, and I think what that will mean is really big changes in the way the industry does science. It doesn't mean science, domain expertise doesn't matter. It just needs to be combined together and understood. And the final thing, which is a bit of an outlier, I have always been very publicly very sceptical about data markets. I love the theory of them. I'm even an advocate for them, but I thought they were years off because I thought the business model wasn't there and it would take a long time. And we had a corporate customer, very large, one of the top 10 in Australia, say to us just last week that they really want to work on data markets and making data available to researchers and innovation in a data market way, and thinking about how that is done and monetised. It is the first time that an owner of significant data sets has said that to me, as opposed to a researcher or a tech company that wanted to get access to it. And I think that we're going to see within 10 years data markets really operating, and so I'm excited about that.
Thank you, Ros. Belinda, looking across the big ditch, not the little ditch, Yuli, but what's your perspective on those technologies, given the ecosystems that you're immersed in?
I think looking forward to 2030, we need to be open to the fact that the food system is probably going to be completely different to the one we're facing now. So if I were to think about the technologies for the future by 2030, I would say that they're going to be all the things we've talked about, probably better utilisation of 5G, things like that. But also we need to harness the alternative proteins, and that could be insects. So the producers of today will need different technologies to be able to monitor and model growth rates of black soldier flies or algae or things like that. So we have to be open-minded that as the food system will change, so will some of the technologies that will be able to utilise and implement those. So I think there will always be a place for broadacre. You will never be growing wheat in controlled environment, obviously. But the diversity of the food system, I hope and expect, will expand, and with that will be unexpected technologies and better harnessing of the ones that are currently nascent.
Thank you. And Mary, you're rubbing shoulders day by day with producers in the field with the services you provide and the initiatives that you're guiding. In the grape and wine industry, for example, what's your perspective on the technologies that you see maybe mainstream in 2030?
It's really exciting just to see all of the gadgets, the LiDAR, radar, the sensors, the size of those. And at the moment, we're kind of bolting them on to, machinery that might be going down the road, whereas that's just going to be embedded and seamless. The machine learning that we're just starting to, grasp is amazing. For the first time in the wine sector, we're able to almost in real time have an understanding of the area that we have under vine. Using geographic artificial intelligence, we can then use that as a platform to keep layering information about vine health and so forth. So all of those aspects are really exciting, and the capacity to set and leave, say a robot that can go through and slash and be solar powered and then go back to home base and then repower itself up. We're just starting to see all of that come to fruition. I've got to say, after 25 years of seeing things that didn't work so well, the exponential rate at which they're going to come together is truly exciting.
Cool. And anyone from the audience, I'd be interested to hear a perspective. Hand shot straight up. Are you happy to yell? Or Megsy, have you got your runners on? Yep, here's Megsy.
If you go back to the very first answer of we don't really know what technology will be there in 2030, and then you listen to the great developments of technology, is this not part of the problem when we talk to farmers and agriculture that they're asked to adopt new technology, and then next week that technology is obsolete and they've invested in that technology? How does that fit into the narrative?
Let me give you an answer from a person who's unable to buy television for exactly that reason. So I go to the store every couple of years and I have a look at the new ones that have come out and I go, I like all of those. I'm not sure which one to get. So I go home without buying one. And then I go back in a couple of years and of course the technology's moved on, the prices come down, but there's new stuff. So you can't even buy the one that's now 2 years old that's half the price it used to be. It's an enormous problem. And I think with technology emerging, you absolutely have to find a way to demonstrate the technology, demonstrate use cases which are successful, get confidence in it, and then scale it. If everyone tries to back individual winners, then money will be sprayed around like mad, And there will be the well and truly poisoned for that which is good and that which might come next. So there has to be a way to demonstrate at scale proof of concept projects to demonstrate how the technology can work and benefit, and then back it.
Thank you, Gavin. So, thinking about the next question that we want to pose, and this is intimately related. We heard earlier Michael Cribbar talking about the importance of the person at the other end. Emma Leonard, in her 3-minute thesis presentation, talked about the person, the people. Marty Longbottom talked about trust and engagement. And of course, Professor Kate McGrath made the comment about connect, communicate, engage. So the question is, what do we see the top 3 skills that a producer will need in 2030? So the top 3 skills that a producer may need in 2030. So maybe, I don't know about your bandwidth, but pick one in your mind and park it there. We're talking about the producer. Okay, survey said, digital and technological literacy, resilience and adaptability with a number of definitions or sub-definitions around that, climate, consumer, tech advances, regulatory environment, and data analytics. So that were the 3 that came back from the survey. So, Belinda, in your presentation, just before you nod off, in your presentation you mentioned that very strong bond that you have with the producers in your ecosystems. And what's your perspective from your world about those skills that our producers are going to need in 2030?
I think it's very tempting to leap to the data analytics piece. We're already seeing that it's not the farmers that are doing the data analytics. It's either the technology or increasingly the larger farms are actually employing data scientists. Yeah. So I think we're going to have a shortage of agri-literate data scientists to support the farmers. I don't think this will reside in the farmer skill set. That said, already farmers in their business ecosystem have an awful lot of players. They have their agronomist, they have their bank manager, they have a lot of people, and getting better at challenging and integrating the advice from these different players, I think, is something that currently farmers are not terribly good at. We did some mapping work as to where farmers get their information about new innovations, and as you can imagine, there was 37 different channels. So being able to very effectively and swiftly triage information that you're being given, challenge it and integrate it is I think and I think they need to do that before 2030. I think they need to do it now, but hopefully by 2030 there will be that much more seamless integration of all these kind of here to help people who are all circling farmers.
Thank you. And Mary, again, you're in the weeds a lot in your work. So what's your perspective on the skill, on the aptitude, attitude, obviously, and the skills projections for 2030 for our producers?
I agree, just in terms of having really multi-skilled people, not just in agri-technology, but I'd love to see all our next generation of school kids have a really good and thorough understanding of ecology, getting back to nature, and to see more people who are agri or agroecologists. Within that, of course, understanding the technology, the marketing aspects as well. So that multi-skilled aspect. The need to be innovative and agile at all times, to stand out in a crowded marketplace, to be able to adapt and just continually pivot. It's just going to be such a requirement to be able to move quickly, to be able to keep up with the pace. And I think also we're really mindful of our reliance on natural resources, natural capital. So being more resourceful, doing more with less, using our resources more efficiently, regenerative, and being really mindful of how we can generate value without really negatively impacting on the environment.
Well, thank you. And Gavin, thinking of Bosch, of course, B2B models around deploying innovation, but of course increasingly B2C, going direct to consumers. What's your sense of those of the end user beneficiaries of technologies? What skills do you think they may need in 2030?
So I love the top two, not so much the third one, because I think that's a means to an end, and the end is what the producers and also the other participants in the value chain really need to focus on. A term I use a lot is that competitive collaboration is a skill set that needs to be developed. We've got industries in Australia which are relatively small on a global scale. To be successful in a connected world, it will only come through collaboration. but collaboration by nature means you're giving away competitive advantage to others potentially. So finding that nice balance between collaborating, creating an environment where the whole industry in a country can benefit, but still being able to compete with each other to drive up the performance across the sector as well. So in a connected world, we use the term collaboration is the new black.
Awesome. And Ros, your perspective, given the interactions you have with all actors? Really?
Yeah, look, I think that we need to segment the market, and I would say this generally about today. We tend to sort of say we have this kind of image that what a farmer is, and it's this, you know, male over 60, you know, independent, out on their own property doing their own thing. And this is not the reality of modern agriculture. No. It's really not. And I know it varies whether 80% is being produced with 20. I know PwC is of the view that 90% by value of production is being produced by 10%. And they're all corporate. And they're going to be increasingly corporate because to have the capital needed to move to more sustainable production is expensive, and so they tend to be, you know, big listed companies that are accessing capital through financial markets. And so I think the sort of skills that those companies need are actually quite different to what the sort of skill that a farmer, an independent family farm, needs. And I'm probably better able to comment on the first because that's where we work. We only work with large corporates. We're not working with individual farmers. And I think digital literacy is absolutely clear. And I think if you look at the BCG, they have an index where they say 10% as a benchmark of your staff should be involved in digital transformation projects right now. It's a big number. But what I think is more important is, yes, they have to have digital literacy, and I agree they don't need to have analytics, that's part of the digital literacy, but I think they need to know how to make data-driven decisions. And that means overlaying financial, environmental, production into a way that you're making decisions that improve your practice, which implies that you have to be able to adapt and change. And so I think we really need to see a much greater capability about how to make data-driven decisions. But I agree with everything else, particularly the collaboration, which I'd like to come back to.
Thank you. Was anyone surprised by the number one ranking up there? Does anyone have any perspective they'd like to offer or a question on that one? Frank and then Mike. And I'm watching the clock, both of you. I'm not saying anything about Prolix.
Yeah, I'm just a bit. I mean, I think literacy is the starting point. I think contextual awareness, understanding what the state is, because knowing about it's one thing, but knowing where it's hot, who's doing what, who's doing it well, is way more important. And that's at that top level. I mean, the rest is. Yeah, so it surprised me a bit. Number two, I got.
And Mike, I am going to throw it to you because this is something that's close to your heart. So sorry, you had your hand up. Would you like to offer a comment?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure about digital literacy in the sense that, you know, if we think that AI is going to be well and truly embedded, then who needs to know about it? I mean, it's a big debate about the black boxing. You know, AI really is a black box, and I think there'll be specialists that will be doing that and providing that as a service. And I'm not sure that that's a skill set that the farmer will need. That's a reflection I'd have. The other one, and is I think a little bit what you said too, Ros, was around adapting to change. And I think as a business, particularly the bigger corporate firms, they need to have almost change management. They need a cultural change to be able to shift and change with that, because what we're starting to see, and you'll see with some of our projects with where we've got our OKRs, and one of the objectives in a couple of the slides this morning was, you know, will internal people adopt this decision tool? And so it's the ability to get them to adopt the tool. So that sort of, it feels to me like with new technology coming on board quickly, then it's not about the technologies per se, but it's actually about how people will adopt it and make that change.
Cool. Carolyn, did you want to offer a final comment on that?
Hi, Carolyn James from the Gate with New South Wales DPI. I think another element the producers will, maybe not a skill, but an awareness will be about increasing expectations about social licence, about stewardship, and that will go right back to them, and that they, whether they're corporate or whether they're small farms, that will be part of their piece. Now, how digital informs that, I think, is something we can keep talking about. And then you've also got those counter trends of organic and concerns about GM and things like that. So I'd like to hear how they all fit together.
Cool. What I'm going to do is now add another flavour to the same question. So what are the top 3 skills we feel the other actors in the agri-food innovation system need in 2030? And what I mean by other actors, we're talking about those that are developing technologies and services, and those that are value adding the existence, if you like, of our agri-food system. So 2030, so what do you think those other actors may need? So bearing in mind this is what we're talking about, if you like, at the end of the chain, the producers, the ones that are critical in growing and developing the product. What about the other actors? Now, survey says empathy, communication and collaboration, 2 of which we heard about already in the producer end. But the empathy floated right to the top and was a clear winner in that. And when you look at some of the comments down the right hand of the screen, around social license, even the ability to use simple tools effectively, becoming solution providers, not widget retailers. There was a wonderful comment made by a producer at a Queensland Ag-Tech forum 2 years ago in Brisbane. Don't offer me solutions, just solve my problems. Now, yet our meaning of solutions is that. And that's that whole critical piece about the interconnection and that dialogue, and that process of dare I say it, that agile process. So let me just throw that to you, Ros, for example. So you deal with this every day of your working life. What's your perspective of those skills for 2030?
Okay, so if we're now talking about technology providers, yes?
Yep.
Okay, I spend a lot of time thinking about this because it's an issue that we deal with all the time. So we have a set of engineers in our business, software engineers, and we have a set of data scientists, all of which have PhDs, and we have 3 of the UTS folks who are embedded with us. All of them extremely talented, high-skilled people. What I think the skill that we need to be creating is actually the ability to take those skills and apply them in a commercial environment. So there are hard technical skills that don't come in that list, that they absolutely have to be productive. And what happens is we keep employing data scientists, at a very high skill level, and put them in a commercial environment and expect them to be productive, without actually really understanding what do they need to be able to do to now produce in an environment where you're churning out a model, in a framework every single day for every single crop, that's changing every single day, and it's reliant on this huge engineering effort to make the whole thing work. That is a very different form of data science to a PhD data science, where you're basically operating as an individual and you never have to put anything into production. Now, it doesn't mean the 2 skills aren't incredibly important, but I find it very depressing when we think that the unemployment rate of STEM graduates is actually higher than the general university population. Right? How could that be when everybody is telling us that we need more STEM graduates? And the reason is, like us, we go around trying to employ people who are already experienced data science modelists, and we're not putting the effort into training to translate people from being excellent STEM graduates at postgraduate level with very good, data science skill into an environment where they can be commercially productive. So I think there are some very hard skills that we need to get better at doing. The second thing is, I absolutely agree that we have to have people who know how to understand the sector they're in and the business problem they're trying to solve. Because what we also find with our data science folks is they just love a problem, and they'll just chase it down to make it as perfect as they possibly can. And we don't need that commercially. What we need is people who will solve enough of the problem to create value and then continually improve it. So we need to get more of a commercial, or not even a commercial because it can happen in social services, but for people to understand what it means to deliver value to an end user is really important. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be better than what they've got and then continue to improve. And the final one is collaboration, because you absolutely have to be able to work with people, with your customers, with other providers, with universities. You've got to be able to listen, hear, understand difference, and creatively find solutions to that can be implemented with data. So I think it's a quite complex package, and I think it's something that the Food Agility CRC potentially has a good role in how do we actually go beyond just having a whole lot of people with technical skill into making them really productive and efficient. And as Mike said at the beginning, like those judo players of data scientists in Australia, that they just do the most with the least effort.
Thank you, Roz. Gavin, there was an interesting comment about reference to STEM, and I know you're a passionate advocate of getting kids fired up in STEM, and I'm not sure if that would feed into your answer, but I'd be curious on your take on this question.
So all of those are really interesting dimensions to that question. One that for me, with a background in manufacturing and engineering, that's missing is continuous improvement. If we look at the cost of living as it's evolved over the last 2 decades in Australia, average 2 and a bit % a year, I guess, over 2 decades. So the price of a Toyota Corolla 20 years ago, relative to the price of a Toyota Corolla today, about the same. Far better car, more tech in it. Everything should be more expensive, but you don't pay any more for it. That's an example of where industries recognise that they can't just allow costs to go up, that they have to find a way for every increase in cost to take cost out as well. And that is driving a continuous improvement culture in quite a number of segments and in a number of sectors. In agriculture, we're seeing improvements through economies of scale, small coming together into medium, several mediums coming together into large. But I wonder whether across the value chain, with all of the system actors, they are really looking at how do we make the cost of the agriculture sector lower rather than just justifying why the prices are going up, whether it's in transport, whether it's in labour, whether it's in inputs, whether it's in processing. Continuous improvement is an absolute skill set and a mindset that I think can be applied more broadly across all actors in the system.
Thank you, Gavin. Mary, your comments?
Sure. For me, I think transparency is really key. The social licence, us being able to demonstrate ethical environmental stewardship and being able to do that on demand. The collaboration piece is obviously really important to be able to create innovative solutions, and also economy of scale so that we can maintain, I guess, that competitive edge, spread risk in international market trade, given that it's becoming more and more unpredictable. And I think systems, fully integrated thinking, so that we can have more of these seamless production systems that go all the way through the value chain.
Thank you. And Belinda, what's your take on that question?
So I was really struck by Roz's point, and I think one of the way we would phrase it is how good is good enough. And so often we see the strive for perfection or the nature paper actually is getting in the way of a technology or an innovative practice making its way into widespread commercial adoption. So I think an understanding and an acceptance of how good is good enough in order to make a difference in a business. The other thing is around innovation management, and I think a system for innovation management, which I think also loops back to the previous question, is that at the moment we're seeing the tech developers and the researchers just bombarding the farmers with all this cool stuff. And the really important thing from the farmer's perspective is to be able to embed that into the existing strategy and the future strategy. And at the moment, we're seeing it's kind of piecemeal. It's like, oh, there's a good thing. That looks good. Let's try it. Let's try that one. And you're actually not seeing it as a structured approach to mapping out what your business needs are and where the innovations fit in and map along those over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years. And that is going to change almost daily, potentially. But so everybody in the value chain understanding the innovation management process and when and how it's appropriate to feed in those techs rather than being just so in love with your technology or your latest bit of kit or your piece of research.
Excellent, thank you.
Dave, can I just add one piece?
Yes,
to
Ross,
just
absolutely.
when Belinda was speaking, it sort of reminded me of this issue because with the research community, there is this, and it's part of what creates excellence. So I don't want it to be a criticism, it's an observation that there's this drive to perfection which comes from the culture of peer review. It has to be better than the existing knowledge, and it's got to be, peer reviewed, and it's got to be really excellent. Excellence is a great thing, and I really think it's a very, pervasive part of culture, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I think the way that we get around this is to start being absolutely disciplined in measuring error and making it very clear to people that all models are wrong. It's just a question of how wrong they are. And so if you tell your customer or your stakeholder or whoever you're supporting what the error rate is, you both create trust, but you create an environment where it's okay to be wrong and to actually allow for continuous improvement. When you pretend that it's all perfect is where you really, come unstuck. And so in our business, we actually tell our customers the accuracy of our microclimate predictions. We're the only weather service in the world that does this. And we also tell them the error predictions of our own things like yield prediction and compare it to their manual systems. And this is really, really important for us because it really creates trust. But I think the lesson is much broader. It's much broader about how do we create a culture of allowing models to be wrong by giving transparency, which builds trust. And I think it's very important for CRC projects that we start building this into our way of working.
Thank you, Roz. Now, I want you to reflect back on Mara's wonderful cameo, thought-provoking piece we opened our session with. The challenges we face with our climate. What are the most important things we need to do to make our food system climate resilient? Now, I'm sure you've got 1,000 different pathways in your head, but pick one and park it. What's the most important thing we can do, or we need to do, to make our food system climate resilient, looking forwards? Okay, survey set. Any surprises? A lot of heads nodding.
No, the question is how.
So, Mary, I'll open with you because I know you're totally committed. Like this is one of the prime focuses of your other life as well as within food agility. What do you think are the most important things we need to do?
I think just having a really good grounding and understanding nature is something that we tend to gloss over. It gives us really good insights, ways that we can build resilience, and also things like functional biodiversity, not just biodiversity for biodiversity's sake. So we can be really strategic about how we completely rethink perhaps our production systems. It means that we can start to think of ways where we can have better buffered systems so that those systems can rebound or they can reorder themselves a whole lot more quickly after you have really significant disruption, and it might be, extreme weather events. I think AgTech's great in terms of being a tool, but it's not an underpinning knowledge. It provides us with the capacity to have access to real-time information. So I think, that's part of it, but it's not to be seen as a panacea. We are starting to hear more about the terms like natural climate solutions. This is just a fancy way of saying ecological restoration by planting trees and looking after our soils. So I think there's a whole lot of practical ways that we can do this. I can give a quick example. I'm rolling out a project throughout South Australia, which is also gaining interest nationally, called Eco Vineyards. We're building the functional biodiversity by incorporating native insectary plants, which provide fantastic habitat for a whole range of good bugs that then provide natural biological control. We can then start to build in, plants that are fire resistant, and we can overcome issues like having to spray, say, herbicides in the undervine area or spraying insecticides because we're getting the natural biological control. So within that, there's a whole range of other stacked ecosystem services, and we're actually also contributing to these natural climate solutions. So that's something that we can all consider doing, is getting away from this idea of a big monoculture, which is not well buffered, not well resilient, to think about ways that we can incorporate much more functional biodiversity.
Thank you, Mary. And Belinda, looking way over the horizon, your neck of the woods, what's your stake on that from UK, Europe perspective?
Yeah, I'm surprised there wasn't anything in there about breeding, because breeding isn't a panacea, but I think there will be with the move towards paludiculture and use of managing wetlands. There's a big move in the UK particularly to think about, are we going to have to reflood some areas to help capture the carbon? So on-farm carbon capture, and then those crops potentially being developed that are particularly well, I know it's ironic to talk in this country about farming wetlands, but that is really important in the UK and Europe, potential for carbon sequestration and then adding an additional product on top of that. There's also something in there about nitrogen. So I think we need to look at technologies, and I think that my understanding is they're at lab scale at the moment, using things like electrolysis technologies to generate nitrogen potentially on farm. I know there's some technology in Iceland that's been developed. It's currently at microliter scale. Being able to scale that up so that we're not reliant on the Harvey Bosch process, I think that's going to be really important to have on-farm nitrogen, and the final piece is on-farm power generation, because I mean, the UK has been on complete blackout for about 6 hours with the storms we had the other day. Everybody fell apart, and if you are able to harness tractors as batteries that actually balance out the national grid, and you've actually got a better, more effective way of being able to harness energy and power and generate and store on farm, I think that's really important as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And Gavin, looking across to you, what's your take on this?
I'm the master of the provocative statement, and this is the last question for the day, isn't it?
We've got the Donald Rumsfeld one, but yeah, you can have a crack,
so
and we can
does
make
anyone
this
have any
last.
rotten fruit with them? Anything that's gone off, produce that they can fling? Well, one of the things we can do is stop trying to farm the things that don't make sense, given the climate that we're facing.
Yeah.
How about just change what we do, be adaptable, become resilient, and go off and do something else? We don't have to farm what we've always farmed. As a suggestion.
Dinner's going to be fun tonight. Thank you, Gavin.
I'll make a decision whether I'm coming or not based on my But the other thing, I mean, I've been outwardly quite critical about the NBN and the rollout of that over the last years, and I don't know if anyone knows what the latest number is we've spent on that. Anyone have a figure? 70 billion, 80,
Frank?
90?
No.
It's a very large number, and most of the money is going to be made redundant with 5G, unfortunately. So if we'd put that money into water distribution instead of into the information superhighway, I wonder whether we might have actually saved bits of our agricultural industry just by redistributing that which exists in plenty but in the wrong spots, which might help sustain agriculture in some forms.
Thank you for a very thought-provoking comment. And okay, and I'm just putting Gavin on notice that we're very happy to continue this conversation over dinner as well. Thank you. But Ros, would you like to make a comment on that?
Yes, I would actually. I think that fundamentally the most important thing that we can do is actually stop climate change. Because this question is, how do we adapt to climate change, not how do we stop climate change? And that means, as a community, we need to take immediate action to stop all fossil fuels and to make sure we meet our international commitments and not go over 1.5 degrees. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. All right.
After that, what we have to do is actually then start to focus. As an economist, you won't be surprised, is I want to put in place natural capital accounting so that all decisions that we make are based not only on economic but social and social and environmental. To do that, we need to have a way that we can actually make those costs real and that the market responds to them. And the way I'm doing that, I mean the consumer market, the capital market of where we invest and how we actually bring technology, because until we make all those things that are invisible visible, then we won't create the forces to generate all the things and the brilliant ideas that my colleagues up here have come up with. Is that we need to actually create a systematic way of driving that change, and I believe that is by generally introducing triple bottom line accounting, if you like, that is actually transparent and driving the markets. It's very, very hard to do, but I think that's fundamentally it would make one of the most systematic changes that would drive a really important approach to climate resilience, because we'll see what we currently don't see.
Thank you, Ros. I was going to say we'll throw it open for a comment. We have time. Ian Yule, one of our distinguished visitors from New Zealand, Plant Research. Would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I think it's been a really good panel, and I think you've covered a lot of stuff. And I wouldn't disagree with anything that you've said particularly, but the real key problem is you talk in generalisations, and we can agree about generalisations and the point that Gavin just made. If we're going to create change, and I think, like, say, intensity of production is one thing that we're going to have to address. We're going to have to increase our intensity of agricultural production. How do we do that efficiently? We've got big business, and you're going to have people. So in a general sense, it all makes sense. But as an individual, how do I step off the cliff? Or how do you, or someone like you, support me or help me, give me guidance to step off that cliff, to take a risk to completely change my farming system, because I think that's what a lot of people will need to do.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to break all Australian protocol and let the Kiwi have the last say on that question. But let's please resume this over dinner as well. Okay, the Donald Rumsfeld question. Start with each of the panel members, a minute each. What don't we know yet that we'll need to know in 2030? What don't we know yet that we'll need to know in 2030? Bit of a mind stretcher.
That's a tautology. That you can
Gavin,
ask
for
that
your
question.
sins, you can answer first.
Oh, thanks a lot.
What don't we know?
I think that's what we describe in New Zealand as a hospital pass. What don't we know that we need to know? I didn't even understand the question. There's lots I don't know, and I suspect I'll die not knowing a lot of stuff. What we don't know is what will develop in terms of computing technology to replace today's models and typical silicon-based processors. So we talk about quantum computing, we talk about neuromorphic computing. We don't know within what time frame that technology will come that just makes everything we imagine today redundant. We've been working on autonomous driving as a company for 2 decades, and literally until 5 years ago, the computing power did not exist to realize it. 5 years ago, we signed up with NVIDIA for a chip that would process 300 billion operations per second, and we thought, thank goodness, now we have the chip that can actually support what we need in the car to do all of the things and process the sensor data. Unfortunately, we find that it's not fast enough. And with traditional silicon, it may never be fast enough. So we need that next quantum jump in computing capability to deliver AI, to deliver automation, to deliver what we believe today only the human brain is capable of to make some of those amazing advances, possibly by 2030.
Thank you. You warmed up well, Gavin. Well done. Roz, your comment on that one.
Okay, well, this is going to be weird coming from a technologist, but I actually think we need to learn how to run a political economy that balances the needs of people, the planet, and society. And I don't think we know how to do that, and I think it's getting worse with social media and the way that we are making decisions with such short-termism. And so I think we need to learn how to actually do that. And part of it is how do we govern technology? Because technology is part of our solution, but it also has enormous risk. And of all the things that we know with things like artificial intelligence, data markets, how do we avoid data monopolies and just creating more concentration of wealth? So how do we create the political economy where people can reach their full potential, that we protect the planet, and that we actually deliver to everybody's needs?
Thank you, Roz. Good. And Belinda?
My thought is around complexity. So the scientific endeavour has traditionally taken a reductionist approach. So we're now able to understand in minute detail around pathways and molecular interactions. We know, and to your point, there's going to have to be, and there is starting to be, a systems approach to understanding so many elements around soils, around ecosystem services, and that is really hard. We hope that some of the new tools will help us get a bit of a handle on that, but I think if we're really serious about understanding the system of the agri-food production basis and the ecosystem services, we have got to get some kind of handle on how we get comfortable with complexity and learn to manage it.
Thank you. And Mary, comment.
For me, I don't think I'm so worried about what we'll need to know, because I think we know what we need to do now, and part of that is overcoming apathy. It's a step change, it's a cultural change in terms of us being able to safeguard where we end up in 2030. It means that we'll need to be brave, perhaps take less, give more, heal the landscapes that we're working, so ultimately we can have very productive landscapes. And I think, we've got really good information at our fingertips. And we know that around a third of the greenhouse gas emission by 2030, can be provided by carbon drawdown through natural climate solutions. So I see that we need to put a value on natural capital. Not only is it the triple bottom line, but it's the quadruple bottom line. Part of that is culture, it is connection to country, and it's having a value on that so that we can really prosper within that time frame and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you for very well thought out responses. Any final comment from the audience on that? What a cool question to end with.
You didn't warn us about that one. You
No.
warned us about all the other ones.
That was a Donald Rumsfeld question. So what I'd like to do, let me tell you something. So tomorrow, as an organisation, we're going to sit down with our wonderful board, and we're going to be creating the strategy looking forward for the next year for the business. And what wonderful grist you've given us for that mill today, in terms of your feedback to the surveys, in terms of the panelist comments, and to your own observations as well. So thank you for that. It's not only been a fruitful discussion to have this time of day, and what a great question to end with, but it's actually extremely important to us as an organisation to work with you and to serve you moving forward. So with that in mind, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panellists for their contributions.